Welcome to Unite Now, where we bring unity to you, wherever you are.
Hi everyone, I'm Cathal, a client partner manager for monetization at Unity. In this session, I'll be covering the basics of monetization and essentially giving clarity into the complex world of the advertising industry. So before we begin, here's the agenda. We'll be going over the types of monetization, planning, optimization, mediation, and generally mistakes to avoid. So to begin with, we're really going to start with the types of monetization. And there are two main monetization types for free-to-play games. You've got IAP and ads. Now, I know that there are subscription, there are premium at games, and plenty of others, but we're going to be focusing on the main ones. And mostly advertising. So in-app purchases are a great way to allow users to make purchases within the context of their gameplay. This may include the ability to buy virtual currency, which can be used to acquire, valuable assets. It's a common way that many developers get started with monetization, as it's natively integrated into what the player is already doing. Now, ads on the other side, ads are the most common method that content creators use to allow their content to be consumed for free. As most mobile games are free to play, it's a very popular monetization method to generate scalable revenue without having to charge players. There are many types of ads, and we'll explore them in more detail in the next tutorial. So planning and strategy. Planning and strategy is absolutely critical to the success of your app, and there are a number of variables that can be considered. And firstly, we'll look at game type, because the game type matters. The category of the app is important as the KPIs completely differ. If you want to look towards more hyper-casual types of games, then you would need to prioritize your ad monetization strategy and limit IAP to the standard, remove ads for X. So Unity actually released a large 2020 game monetization report which breaks down KPIs by category and by country, and I could not recommend it enough for people developing games. You can see here that categories such as Word drive on average 82% of ads revenue, while Action is 65% IAP. Understanding the game type and the category should be fundamental to your overall strategy. And feel free to just reach out to your account manager or click the link below to get a copy of this report. The game you want to create should have originality, but it's important to research similar apps to understand what's popular and their core loops. You should also be looking at their strategy and their app store optimizations, as they've probably already done the research that you will need to do. There are various ad formats that you can include in your app, and it's important to know how and when to integrate these types of formats. Typically, we see hyper-casual, word, and trivia apps integrate banners and interstitials, as opposed to mid-core strategy game, which would usually have rewarded videos. Interstitials are often disregarded as they are included as a side thought, which can be frustrating. Interstitials can be done very poorly, and it has genuinely a negative user experience. But using segmentation to direct interstitials to users who are not engaging with rewarded videos or IAP can significantly improve your revenues and other KPIs. Just remember that you're going to convert maybe 1 to 2% of your users to a paid user. And for rewarded video usage, if you get up to 60-70% rewarded video usage, that's gold. So there's a huge proportion of your user base who are not monetizing from rewarded video or IAP. I actually worked with a studio called Greener Grass who implemented interstitials in a way that actually improved retention, lowered churn, and increased ARPDAU. And you can see how they all did it in the link below. So Unity and Delta have actually done a number of studies which show how the relationship of players and ads is constantly evolving. Research shows that the integration of ads has a higher retention rate versus a controlled no ad environment. And this goes against the long-standing myth that if you add ads to your game, it will increase churn, which is actually false. We're seeing the percentage of ads in apps rising significantly each year, and many large IAP-only brands or studios are investigating or currently integrating an ad strategy. You can even see here that puzzle and strategy games show higher retention rates across D1, D3, and D7 for players exposed to ads compared to those who were not. And to be honest, I speak to dozens of developers ranging from indie to AAA every single week. And what a lot of people don't realize is how many mistakes that even the most veteran studios make with their game and monetization strategy. And we'll go over a few common mistakes today. So we often see app developers creating the app of their dreams and decide to add a rewarded video or IAP bundle right at the end, just at launch, without fully understanding their economy or strategy. Monetization should be researched from the beginning. Now, it doesn't need to be integrated at the beginning, but it does need to be known and understood, because you are trying to generate more revenue from your users than it takes to acquire them. And if you don't, your app will fail. And as I mentioned above, app owners need to understand that ad monetization is vital. It's only a very small percentage of IAP only apps that will actually truly succeed. You should keep in your mind that rewarded video integration will add value. The player should want to and be excited to click the advert every time. If a user is seeing a rewarded video placement and just never clicks it because they're not interested, there is something wrong. Archero is a great example of how to do this. Finally, I see devs trying to design apps without understanding how the category or game type really impacts the overall monetization, as I discussed above. But because they only focus on what they want. And this is going to take me to the next slide. So, understanding your player base. Understanding your current and future player profiles associated with your game is crucial to adding value. I often see developers decide on a monetization strategy based entirely on their personal opinion, which is crazy, right? Your app will have multiple player personas. Satisfying these is the difference between your app being in the top 1,000 or top 100 in the App Store. These are just some personas. There may be more or less depending on the complexity of your game. Now, the collector is a typical achievement hunter. They love getting gold medals or 3-star times. These type of players will increase your retention and the mechanics will lower churn. Min-maxers are people who have a high percentage of time spent on customization. Anything with a leveling gear or ability system will love this persona. These players will use, Discord, they'll read patch notes, and they'll have high engagement. Great to have these people on using the app. So challengers are quite different to the others. Challengers are people who actually just love a challenge and don't mind losing the odd time when it's fair. They don't like cheat mechanics that simplify the level, such as items or boosts. These type of players love extra lives, daily challenges, and a good grind. And they're great for retention and rewarded video engagement. Finally, we have progressors. These players have limited time and they like to get the most out of their time, usually playing, hyper casual games. They like rewarded videos that offer a good deal, such as remove 50% of the time or give 3 times payout instead of 2. Genuinely the most important thing to remember, and sometimes something I personally see daily, is you are not your player base. You need to think outside of what you like and dislike and understand what design decisions would cater for which type of player persona. Using this, you can estimate the revenue potential of a game mechanic and prioritize that efficiently. So for example, if you knew you had lower churn, you should be looking at mechanics that focus on fixing churn, but also that add to the value of a player persona that's already in the game. You can't just stick on a calendar because other apps do it. It needs to make sense, because the gameplay is always paramount. Essentially, it comes down to gameplay. Are you having fun in your app? Would you play this game on D1, D3, D7, D14, or even D30? What is actually limiting your enjoyment? You can have all the gimmicks and mechanics in the world, but the gameplay is key. High player retention in games correlate directly to lifetime value and therefore your overall success. The apps with the highest retention are the apps that make the most revenue. Most of the time. Your game economy is important. Very important. Giving too much or too little can be the difference between success and failure. I would recommend to understand your economy as a currency unit. For example, 1 gem is equal to 0.004 cent. By breaking down each ad placement and each IAP and how much you are actually giving, you can further understand ARPDAU and LTV. And you can actually use Delta DNA, which is part of the Unity ecosystem, to segment your user base to truly understand how the various cohorts are performing and act on this information to ultimately lead to the app's success. Now, another mistake I often see is the overusage of restrictors. This can come from age blocking, category blocking, or block lists. People block far too much. Let the machines do their job. I often hear of developers blocking their own category, believing that churn to competitors will occur. What you must consider is that if the player churns to a competitor, they were probably going to churn anyway. You are better off allowing your competitors to pay a premium CPI for these users, as they will be driving a lot of your revenue, particularly in categories such as puzzle, strategy, and sports. I would recommend to not block anything at the beginning unless it is required to align with your brand or requires, an age restriction. But I would not recommend blocking your own category. On the right, you can actually see a first look at a new feature that Unity team will be releasing, or it might even be released right now when you're watching this. You'll be able to see the actual potential impact of revenues when blocking an app or organization in the near future on the Unity dash. Now, we're going to dive a little bit into ad mediation itself. So things move really quickly in this industry, and what you hear right now might not be relevant in 6 months. I personally work with hundreds of different developers, and I can't stress enough that there is no right answer to which mediation to use. So the traditional ad mediation waterfall. Traditional ad mediation is an advertising auction strategy that prioritizes ad networks over others based on performance. It calls the network at the top of the waterfall and requests an ad. If an ad can't be shown, the next network in line is called to fill. This is a pretty old school approach, and it's probably going to be phased out or going to hybrid with the likes of header bidding. So what exactly is header bidding? Header bidding or parallel bidding or real-time bidding was initially developed for the web or in browser. It was brought to mobile, but it's still in early development and still has a lot of kinks to work out. Most mediation providers as of July 2020 are moving towards real-time bidding support. So what should you actually do? What mediations should you use? I would recommend in general to use a mediation that has a hybrid solution, that you can use both header bidding and in tandem with the waterfall, as you can use each method to essentially fill the gap created by the other, and it will improve your revenues in general. Now, what are the pros and cons? So the actual integration is a bit of work, but there's less day-to-day work involved in general. There's lower latency, most likely, because it's going to be bidding in real time, so there won't be as many requests. There's going to be more networks in the actual bidding, so you will actually need to do less work, and it usually improves the revenue as of today. But there is some cons because it is still very new. So there's less control for the publishers. There's a lack of transparency. Adoption remains fairly limited, And potentially the performance may be worse without IDFA, which we're not sure is going to be rolling out as intended. So what kind of providers are there? So there's managed and self-service mediation. Managed includes billing, SDK, and waterfall prioritization, while self-service, the app owner manages the waterfall, priorities, and values. These days, most can provide both. It totally depends on your own category. If you have a hyper casual app that needs a huge amount of work, you'd be going for self-service. But realistically, what mediation is best? So it is a question I get almost every day. What mediation is best? Cathal, what would you recommend? And as I mentioned above, there is no right answer. And it may make sense to understand what the major developers or publishers use right now, but you have to remember that they have a completely different set of resources and requirements to you. And it breaks down to 3 questions. What mediation should you or I choose? And number 1 is, how much time do I have to optimize? Do you have the capabilities to do it all yourself? Or do you need to hire someone for you? How many people will you need to hire? If you're looking at self-service mediation, remember that one game can have a waterfall per platform, ad format, and country tiers. One game can have 10 to 12 waterfalls before you even know it. So be wary of having to make changes too often if you don't have the bandwidth to cover it. If you do, it can be in your favor, but be wary of the premise of set and forget. You should have enough time to be able to optimize all of your waterfalls weekly with no issues. How many devs are actually on your team? Managing waterfalls with multiple networks require not just hands to manage the waterfalls, but it's a huge amount of work to maintain the SDKs, adapters, and wrappers. This means less time for your developers to work on what's important. Some mediations allow for more custom integrations, which is ideal for a big team or a studio aiming for great success. So if you do have a huge amount of resources there, you should be going for a mediation that has more custom support. I can't stress enough that how many studios roll out mediation with 6 to 8 networks for a tiny amount of impressions and essentially ruin their monetization or ads revenue. Now, and finally, what is actually the split between IAP and ads? If you plan to have mostly IAP, it's much better to have a stable mediation plus ad networks that aren't going to cause crashes, latency, or issues. A managed mediation or exclusivity with Unity might be the best approach here when dealing with 90% IAP. If your game is 90% ad revenue, you should be looking for a mediation that's much more hands-on. So pricing tips in the waterfall itself. And you can see here on the top right, there's some publishers that have 1,000 floors for each app. And this can happen with major hyper-casual studios. And you can see here on the right, you've got various groups, A/B testing, etc., etc., etc. And what I'd need to say is to don't over-engineer it. Setting price floors on placements generating less than 5,000 impressions per day is generally not worth it. You should have enough floors in place to have about 5k impressions or more. If you do have more, you could add more floors. If you have less, you should stop. Another is to separate line items so that they are not too close together. I have seen so many studios who have multiple networks at the same price. It needs to be a separate price point. So for example, you can see here there is 38, 29, 21, 13, 7. This could be network 1, network 2, network 3, network 4, but you would never have multiple networks on the same price. The next is to give it time. Allow for a couple days to evaluate the results of floor changes. Remember that when you make a change and you force a floor, you're essentially asking the various exchanges and various algorithms to change how they value your user base. And it's important to wait between optimizations. And finally, global floors are more effective than you think. Now, that doesn't mean that tiering country specific isn't important. It's just that regional granularity often over optimizes in ways that is actually detrimental to targets and fill rate. You should not be doing country specific floors aside from maybe a high US floor unless you're pretty experienced or you have time to manage all of the optimizations weekly. But in general, you probably already know this, but there is a glossary here, which is floor, CPI, ECPM, mediation, waterfall, and backfill. You can look through it yourself at your own time. And we do have some resources here and some guides. So I worked with a colleague of mine to do a free course on monetization best practices, which can be seen in the Unity Learn platform. There's some checklists there, some questionnaires, and just reach out to your client partner at Unity. You would be surprised how much that we can help. So don't be worried that we won't give you some time, because we can help. I would recommend to firstly reach out to your client partner, but also check your app ads and check your settings in your own dash, just to make sure that you're not blocking anything or making any mistakes. Because there is often too many filters and too many blocks happening for many publishers. But I think that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you can join us again soon. Bye.